Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to our webinar today. I hope you're having a good day wherever you may be. Special greetings to the people in the Rochester, New York area, and we're delighted to have you with us for this crisis conversation. This is the sixth in the 2016 series of the Crisis Coach webinar presentations, and our sponsors today are the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and our very good friends at the Eastern Great Lakes Chapter of the Association of Contingency Planners. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and we're pleased to have you as our friend. Hope you can join us on Facebook as our friend, Firestorm Solutions. You can also follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Soul on Twitter. And there is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risks and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We do need to mention to you the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. And this information should be read and considered in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret this information or the webinar itself as legal advice or legal opinion. The underwriter for this webinar series is the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Eastern Great Lakes Chapter of the Association of Contingency Planners. You can go to firestorm.com and you can watch previous webinars and you can register for future ones. We're so pleased to have Dr. Michael Redmond with us today. Michael's the chapter president. Michael, over to you, please.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're happy to be part of this program. I think Firestorm's doing a great job. The association Contingency Planners name is changing in September, by the way. We're going to be the Association of Continuity Planners because our membership has changed over the years. We have so many people that are cybersecurity like myself, information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management. So those are the people that are part of our membership. We have meetings live once every other month, and we do, of course, the webinars with Firestorm every month. We also have programs that we allow all of our members from all over the world who are not available to come to our meetings, which are held in Rochester and Buffalo. Our membership is Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Ohio. We allow our members to call in. So anyway, in summary, we have a meeting coming up, an annual conference on September 14th. It's going to be an all-day event. For members, it's free. For non-members, it's $55. It covers breakfast, lunch, and our reception afterwards, and some great speakers. I encourage you to call Graham, G-R-A-H-A-M. Graham's phone number is 585-393-6051. 585-393-6051. He can help you with the conference or he can help you with membership. Thank you so much for the time to mention this.
Well, thanks, Michael. And a couple of things. Good luck this afternoon. Michael's getting her certification in ISO from an audit standpoint. But with all that educational background and all those initials after your name, I know that is a slam dunk in the process. I would also encourage anyone that's in the Western New York area. The September conference is excellent. In addition to the quality speakers, it's a networking opportunity. And if you're not a member, you know, $55 is a bargain to be able to hear the quality of what's of the speakers there. I've been fortunate enough to present in past years, and it's always a good group, and I anticipate that there will be 100 to 150 people at the event, and I would encourage you strongly to go. This is Jim Satterfield, and glad to speak with you again this month. We've been letting some of the other Firestorm principals talk in our meetings on a regular basis so you can hear additional voices as we go over the various topics. Today was designed as a kind of a mid-year look of where are we when we think about crisis. As you know, Firestorm is now in our 11th year, and we handle crises. We prefer to do the planning and work in advance, but when you're in trouble, you need to have somebody that you can call, and that's us. And so we have responded to a variety of things so far in 2016. You see those that are lined off down at the bottom: sexual molestation, a significant problem in schools and camps, violence, racism, multiple charges affecting a wide range of companies and involvement there. Violence, as we know, is certainly an increasing factor in our workplace and in our schools, and then compliance, more and more pressure from regulators as well as your major clients focusing on that. And as Michael pointed out about the shift in focus more on continuity and what's involved, and those elements are there. But the question is, can you identify what your organization's next crisis is? And we wrote right underneath that, we can, on this particular side. And you see, I didn't scratch out that word response. And what we really want to do today is focus on some of the lessons learned this year to date, and give you some ideas around what you need to focus on. And more than likely, your organization's next crisis is going to be how you respond to the crisis that's occurring right now. And that's where we're going to zero in today and think about that from a variety of perspectives. So where are we? Now, when we think about where we are in today's world, years ago there used to be a thing called the golden hour. You'd have a crisis and you'd have an hour to call up your law firm and your PR firm and get your senior staff together and pull your board members in and decide what you're going to do. So in today's environment, how much time do you have? None. There's already an employee who's posting up on social media, who's sending a video or a recording or pictures. There are multiple people doing this and starting to frame the issues there. And so this is an issue that you need to be ready beforehand, thinking about what are our communications, what are our vulnerabilities and threats, what are the indicators that they're about to occur, what are we going to do first, what are we going to do second. And when we think about it, creating this intelligence network to monitor, and we spent a lot of time in our webinar series with you talking about creating intelligence networks to identify those threats and risks as they start to emerge, or even before in many cases. And I would encourage you, all our webinars are recorded. You can go back and listen to those sessions again at no cost. So if you wait until the event is happening, it's going to be too late. So your leadership has to know what to do before now, before the actual events start to escalate and become an issue. Now, we have seen over this week the death of Muhammad Ali and the spectacular things that he did and what he also stood for. And there was a quote that I saw in one of the stories about him that I had not heard attributed to Muhammad Ali. Silence is golden when you can't think of a good answer. I think that's phenomenal advice. Every time we respond to a crisis, and have so far this year, the pattern has continued exactly the same way. Everybody says, we need to get out in front of this. We got to get a statement. We got to say things. And we're going to talk about how you deal with that and what you really want to have happen at that point. We had a crisis that occurred, and one of the things, I don't know if you have followed the news, there's a change in the statute of limitations legislation in multiple states. That it used to be that if you didn't report a problem within a period of time, you were prohibited from later reporting. And where we've seen the Bill Cosby case, and we've seen other things that are out there, there's been one around sexual molestation affecting schools and camps and other organizations. And now we're seeing people come back 20, 30, 40 years and not having them barred from pursuing those elements. So there was an allegation that something happened at a camp over a decade ago, and initially it sounded like it was a counselor and then it was a camper, and so the story evolves as it would over time. Had the camp communicated early and it addressed it, they would have expanded their awareness level inappropriately, and we see that happen over and over again. Now, anytime there's a crisis, people want to know how they're going to get through it. You spend a tremendous amount of time, money, and energy doing business plans and operational plans and all of those things that in your business. Well, you need to do that same level of planning to focus on how to deal with the crises as they expand and the consequences that result from that. If you're trying to explain your way out of a crisis, you're going to be losing. So what we want to really get you to think about in the lessons learned so far this year is that communications quickly, communications that try to explain, people trying to make decisions under pressure are going to lead you to bad outcomes. Now, in thinking about every one of the crises that we've seen this year today, they're a human crisis. It's about a person. It's about someone that's had an impact on them as a result of events that have occurred. And the organizations are going, what do we do now? What do we say? How do we get those things out there? And if we jump on that too quickly, we're going to get down to a path that we can't come back from. We're in a political period as we've seen the elections and the comments made, and then people over-interpreting or interpreting them differently, or people not understanding the impact of the words that they have. And that suddenly shifts the issue. It's been an up and a down roller coaster through the political sessions at this point. This candidate's up, now they say something, they're down, the next one comes up, and that goes back and forth. If you have to make these good decisions, you have to know what you're going to say, or your business will be impacted, and coming back from it will be extremely difficult. So when we think about the impact, a crisis can be good for your company. It can be bad. One of the things that we focus on is working with the leadership within an organization of how do we transform this crisis into value. And that's an interesting mental shift, because instead of being on the defensive, there's a way to take a look at this and to frame where we're going. We've given you messages in the past of what you need to look at and say, and I'll remind you of those as we're ending. But remember, this is your organization. It's your people. It's your brand. It's your reputation. Monitoring and having that intelligence will help frame what we're going to say. So anytime there's a crisis, there's going to be a reaction. There are going to be people that say, we need to get out in front of this. There's going to be people that say, you should have done this. They're going to interpret what's going to happen. But identifying the impact, and as we've talked about continuity already this morning, as we think about a business impact analysis, and if this happens, what's the impact on our organization? What's the impact if we lose this particular department? Focusing on the consequences, because the crisis itself is short. And a better term for this entire area is consequence management. And so if we can predict the vulnerability, develop a plan to deal with that, continually monitor, and then we can update it as we go along. And that plan is going to include actions, what are you going to do, and it's going to be what are you going to say at this point in time. So let's think about a lot of these things. I think we always hear that we want to know, how do you stop this? How do you get this thing out of the way? We don't want to have those types of things impacting us. So what do you do within that? And there's a word here, insured, on this slide. And remember that all of you have insurance for your company. It could be property or liability insurance or workers' compensation or a variety of other things. And what's included within that? In fact, I was interviewed for an article now that there's a property insurance company that's starting to include some crisis management coverage associated with that property policy. So what we're finding is that there's an increasingly greater role of looking at this, and particularly at the very beginning. That's when this is going to go bad, at the beginning, and it'll set the tone for everything else. So how do we stop this? If you could just stop the crisis, if you had a little time machine there, you hit the button, and so we'd have a chance to all talk about it, we'd figure it out, where everything is just don't stop, and it's not going to happen. So in this initial aspect of a crisis, in your role of working within your company, the best thing you can do is try to slow the process down. so that we don't rush right out, take an action, or make a statement that will later turn out to be wrong. Because once we lose credibility, it'll be very difficult to get that back. And we've seen that this year multiple times. You're going to make wrong decisions in a crisis. There's so many that have to be made. There's so much misinformation. Their mistakes are always made. So slowing this process down should be your goal. We talk about that as crisis stop. And think about that for the first hour of the crisis. You've got to slow this thing down and help your organization stabilize the situation, trigger the appropriate resources, opine on the exposures or the consequences that are going to be coming, and prevent the common crisis errors that we see repeated over and over again. It's almost like organizations have a playbook to say how many of these mistakes that I can, in fact, make within this period of time. Let's kind of go under the covers for a minute about what we mean by crisis stop and how we do those various things. When you stabilize something, it's the very beginning of what's going on. Once these events get halted, you can take a period of time and you can reflect on them. What's happening is things are happening and reports are coming in very quickly, and there's a rush here to take actions. There's a rush here to make a communications. We're in an instant world today. We can send text messages. We can use notification systems. We can get a press release out immediately to 1 million of our closest friends. But if you do that and that process is misstated, if there was an error, if you didn't have all of the facts, in which you're not, and almost every time what you learn initially is wrong, that's something that you need to have ingrained in your conversations. By the way, there are a couple of things that you can do to help at this point. One, as you're talking with anyone in your organization at a crisis, I want you to first lower your voice. Now, I know that sounds like a simple thing to do, but everybody's excited. The adrenaline is going. This is not the time for you to be able to project your voice to the back of the room. You're trying to keep your voice quieter. Second, slow your speech. If you're talking rapidly, that's going to continue to escalate the feelings and the emotions that are there. So talk quieter, talk slower. Focus the conversation on the consequences. Shift that discussion over. And by the way, through this whole period, as we've told you in multiple of our webinars, make sure you're taking notes. What do you know? Where did you learn it from? Have you verified it? If you give out an assignment, who did you give the assignment to? When is that information due back? So if you can stabilize this right up front and focus on what needs to be addressed at that point in time, that's going to help. So in the stop process, the first thing you've got to do is to slow them down and stabilize that situation. Once we get through that period, now you've got to figure out, we've got to get all the assets in place, then the resources that we can help manage this particular situation. Yes, that's where all the planning that Michael talked about in the when we think about business continuity programs. We've got emergency response, we've got incident management, we've got the crisis management team, we have outside individuals that we can bring in, subject matter experts, our attorneys, our insurance companies. By the way, when someone's in crisis, they generally call two people, their attorney and they call their insurance agent. Now, when we are sitting as a business continuity professionals, we're not thinking of those things. We're thinking about our plan and where we're trying to go. But identifying those and help the focus here to understand, and let's get all the resources in that we need to have. So we stabilized it, we slowed it down, we start getting the resources to the table, and everyone has a role here. What's the role that they're going to be involved? And if you bring in a crisis manager to help from the outside, and there is a big advantage of that in that they're not as emotionally involved because it's not their people, it's not their company, it's not their location. my suggestion is ask your crisis manager that you've identified in advance what crisis have they managed, and have them explain that to you and talk a little bit about the process, because you don't want to provide them on-the-job training with your crisis. Now, the third thing you're going to do is to opine. You're going to have choices. Now, and not all of your choices are easy, and in many cases you're going to be forced to choose between two bad choices. I can do this, and here's the problems with that. I can do this other, and there are problems associated with it. But you're going to need to make decisions and to focus on that. It's not like my grandfather saying to me, "Would you rather have or a whipping?" And that's pretty clear. If you're a kid, I think I'll take the non-whipping option. Here, though, you need to have trusted advisors, people that have been involved in crisis situations that can give you the best advice, and then talk about what these choices are and the consequences would be. By the way, this doesn't relieve you of the responsibility to continue to monitor that intelligence network that we talked about earlier, because you're going to need to understand, is this thing what we thought it was, or is it something completely different? Those are the areas that we're going to come back in. So we stabilized, we triggered resources, we started to opine on what the consequences are, and now what we want to do is to prevent. And what we want to do is to prevent making classic mistakes. That you see right there in the italics in the middle of it, it's if you're explaining, you're losing. If you're out there talking about, well, you know, we had controls in place and they broke, or it's really not our fault, we did everything right, you probably will find out you didn't. You're going to find that those types of things in a crisis will create and exacerbate the problem quickly within those aspects. So preventing those mistakes. The first, we talked to a client this week, and we said, you're going to get a call from a reporter, and the reporter's going to say, I've got a deadline of 5 o'clock, and if I don't hear from you, I'm going to go to press without you. I'm going to go on the air without you. I'm going to release the article without you. And it was almost textbook. They got an email from a reporter who said, you know, I've got to get this out. If I don't hear from you, before 5, I'm going to release my article. By the way, he sent the email at 1:37. He printed his article on the internet at 2 p.m. So that's a standard gimmick. It's a standard aspect, and you do not have an obligation to go back. One of the biggest mistakes that we see is the feeling that you have to communicate with your stakeholders through the media. You know how to reach your employees. You know how to reach their families. You know how to reach your customers. You know how to reach your suppliers. And you can reach them directly with your message without having to go to the media. Yeah, there's a game that sometimes you see played where people are sitting around in a circle, and the first person says something to the next person, who says something to the next person, who says something to the next, and it's passed all the way around. And by the time the message comes back to the original sender, it has no relationship to what was said. The media here is in a position to sell advertising. They're in the entertainment business. News has become reality TV. And if you're talking to the media, you will not have the result that you want to have. And particularly early in the event when all the information is fluid and you're not sure exactly what happened. And how do you explain why one of your people are dead, or why your people used a racial term or took an action that could be interpreted in that direction? You can't explain that. So you want to, if the media calls, have someone take the message, know the station or the newspaper, what's the contact information, and agree to pass it on. You will not call it back. We called the client back on this particular crisis that we were talking about. He picked up the phone. And Susie Laughlin, who's one of the other founders of Firestorm, said, why did you pick up the phone? You didn't know who it was. And he goes, oh, you're right. And so what we want you to do is your messages come in, they go to voicemail, they go to someone else. But these are the types of common failures that will happen. By the way, if you want to go through experiencing this, and I'll mention it later, we're going to do a crisis communications workshop at the Disaster Recovery Conference in September in Phoenix. So if that's something you want to know more about, we'll do it, and we'll probably do a separate webinar on the common failures of communications in a crisis. So the easiest way then to think about this prevent is to focus on why are you communicating. If someone says that we're going to communicate, I want you to stop and say why, and I want you to say that 5 times. So when they say we need to get this message out, you'll say why, and they'll give you an answer, and then you go why, and until you understand that 5 times, you should not speak. If you ever have to speak, and we've covered this in numerous webinars, but I'll do it again, there are 3 themes that you can talk about, and these are the only 3 themes that I ever want you to talk about in a crisis. Will not be defined by the event, will invent the future, and will embrace the families. If you had something horrible that happened, that's not what your organization's about. You can then talk about what you are. What you can say is that we're going to put plans in place to make sure that this type of event never happens again. And lastly, our interest here, though, are the people that this impacted. That's really where our hearts are today. Those messages are safe, and you can't get in trouble. If you're trying to explain, you're going to lose in each of these areas. So now we're in a crisis, and the conversation that we wanted to have today is to help give you some things to think about. So the crisis has just occurred. How do you develop a strategy? Start focusing on these questions internally. What's occurred? What do we know? What's going to happen next? What are we concerned about? What's our plan? What are we going to monitor? How are we going to monitor it? Who's going to monitor it? And the monitoring of that is both traditional and social media, as well as talking to your employees and figuring it out. I've given you the 3 key messages already. Who is the spokesperson? Do not, I said that 3 times, have your CEO or president as your spokesperson initially. Because remember, most of the information is wrong, and once that person loses credibility, you're not going to be able to regain it. You do need to have someone senior in the organization, but we generally don't have a spokesperson with the media in the first 24 to 48 hours. There is no advantage for communications at that point. If you need to communicate with your stakeholders, you will communicate with them directly. If you're going to have a spokesperson, you want to have 2 backups, because that person could have been on travel today or injured or unavailable. So you're going to go to your 2nd and your 3rd person, and they need to have training. And again, that's the kind of thing we're going to be doing at the DRJ. It's certainly interesting for you to have those elements. As these things are looking at, what are the threats and vulnerabilities? Who are the internal and external people that are involved? Do we have a union? Do they have objectives that are going to come into play associated with this? What's their agendas? And in many cases, I would encourage you, if you're bringing in others, have them brought in by your attorney to establish attorney-client privilege, because you don't know what you're going to find out when you get into this event, and you'd like to have that as privileged as we can. Now, as we move from strategy, we're going to be thinking about some of the actions. We've got to establish what happened and identify where the gaps are and how you're going to get the information to fill those gaps. Who are your key contacts? We've established command and control. Who's making the decisions? Every crisis needs a general associated with this. Is your crisis management team driving it? We did an exercise yesterday with an organization, and there was a person in the room who was trying to dominate the decisions in overriding the command and control structure that was there. So as you think about each of these elements, there are significant opportunities. Brand supporters, brand detractors, identifying those. Are there people that will support the organization and support the messages that are out there? You may have to open up a call center. There are organizations that can stand up a call center for you in 45 minutes to handle a deluge of calls coming in. In most cases, the types of events that you're going to be seeing are such that you can handle them with your existing staff and make those calls out. but think about how those elements would be in place. You may need to establish alternative communications channels. We talked with a company yesterday about their use of Facebook by their employees in the middle of a crisis, because that's a platform that would be up even if they had lost those capabilities. But you need to establish that in advance. Almost never would I recommend that you have a press conference. Now, we've managed press conferences in the middle of one of the largest episodes of workplace violence in the United States. But if you can avoid the press conference, I would strongly recommend that. It's going to put you in a position that would be very difficult to rebound and come from. Update all of your plans, create the move forward plan, etc., as those elements would come through. Now, we follow a predict, plan, perform methodology at Firestorm. You've heard us talk about it a lot. The same thing happens in a crisis. Predict what's going to be happening next. What are the impacts? How do you monitor those? What are the strategies and plans that you're going to do? And then execute and continue to monitor to update. So just like any other plan that we focus on the 5 stages: pre-action, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, post-crisis, then the same thing would happen from communications as we think about crisis. Up front, you develop a set of decision and communications procedures and controls. Who has to sign off on that message? What are your message maps? Every time you have identified a vulnerability or threat in your hazard impact matrix, what is an indicator associated with it? What is the message? What is the action that we want to take? If you understand that, you're going to be a lot further down the road in the middle of this crisis, because it's easier to edit than it is to create at those points. Onset, now what are actions and communications? That's where I need you to jump in and do the crisis stop right at that point, because you're going to find there's going to be a rush to get messaging out, and that will be an error in almost every case. Impact assessment, what is it going to mean to us, both from our business and our communications, how we're going to respond and adjust. Our communications evolve over a period of time. We're not going to have one message and stay there. As we learn more, we're going to carry those things. And then afterwards, the after action or hot wash review, how do we improve and how do we make those elements? If you find yourself in a crisis, communications fall into one of 3 buckets. First, coordination. This is the actions that you need people to do. That's shelter in place, lockdown, lockout, evacuate. It sends a specific direction of what you need to focus on to be done, and that's almost always the first communication. And it says here direct internal coordination. It could be external, particularly when we think about that trigger comment and stop, where you're bringing in support resources. But that's the first level of communication that goes out. That's where the notification systems like MIR3 become very beneficial in getting those elements out. The second type of communications is a crisis communications, and it's to address the impacts on brand and reputation. We want to be able to send those messages directly out to our employees, to our clients, to our vendors and suppliers, to our shareholders, to our investors. And the best way to do that is direct, and it is never a good idea to be counting on the media to develop that message and send it for you. The last portion will be the compliance communications. Michael mentioned her work in information security, and as we think of in cybersecurity, there are a lot of notifications that have to go out if there's been identity theft or other impacts that are there. And so we're required to do that. Those types of communications are more compliance driven, and they will come later. They're not going to come in the first seconds or minutes or hours of the crisis. It'll come as you know more and what's going to happen. Almost every regulator has stated that you need to send that message in a reasonable period of time. They have not defined reasonable because every situation is out. We see repeatedly board members or others coming forward and saying, you need to get in front of this, you need to get this message out, you need to get it out now, and we've got to frame the issues. You're not going to frame the issues, others will. You want to be able to deal directly. So these are the 3 C's of crisis communication: coordination, crisis, and compliance. So how do you develop a plan? First, you sit down and predict. Who is the audience? What are their concerns? Who needs to know? And how you say this will vary as you move through. You want to tailor that message, the messenger and the media or medium that you use to get that message out. And you're going to format it for each stakeholder. Now, I'm not going to say one thing to one person and something completely different to someone else, but how we talk. We do a lot of work, as you all know, in the school marketplace. Well, how you talk to children is different than how you talk to adults. How you talk to an employee will be different than how you speak to a customer. So formatting that message. And then finally, focusing on 3 key messages. You can't present 100 things. You can't run on for an hour. It has to be tight, it has to be concise, and the less words you use, the better. And remember again, the tip that I gave you just a few minutes ago, will not be defined by the event, will invent the future, and will embrace the families. Now, what do you have? What do you need? I don't know if you've been to Atlanta. There's a restaurant here or fast food called the Varsity. Varsity's been around since the early 20s. I'm getting a little feedback. So if Michael or Bill, you've got your mic open, or Karen, if you close it, that'll kill that feedback. And by the way, they say, what do you have when you go up there? So if you're ordering a chili dog to go, it's 2 dogs walking. So as we think about those things, you're going to be focusing on what do you have, that's the information, that's the knowledge, that's the resources, and what do you need, and those elements in coming in. The 2 columns on each side of this really help to frame in your mind what you need to be doing in this crisis so that you can identify what's next. You do an initial analysis of the event, the crisis that occurred, establish a baseline media analysis. What's the media saying right now? And then you're going to have to manage that as you go through. You want to coordinate your communications. You want to develop the message maps in response to the events and what you see that's going on, and any preemptive measures that could be done. You need to have media training for anyone that's going to interface directly to it. You have to have intelligence solutions. If you're not having the ability to listen and look at what's being said across social media that's going out in Instagrams and pictures and words, and the ability to have geofencing to go around your location or other areas, the ability to go back in time and see what this person was saying a week ago or a month ago, and look at the sphere of influence and who else is aware. You've got to conduct your own risk and vulnerability threat assessment right now in the middle of this crisis. You have to then let that drive your strategy. You want to engage in brand and business recovery. How do we continue to support our customers? As you look at every business continuity plan and focusing on how I get our key processes up and running, what do we need to do to be able to serve our market? We've got to maintain everyone's confidence. We have to then, in many cases, coordinate with government relations and regulators. Those are going to be key elements for us. We've got to minimize our legal risk. We don't want to make this thing bigger. That's why you're very careful in what you say. You want to make sure that we're reviewing all the things from a compliance standpoint. Are there community partnerships? Are there other people in your community that can work and help you and have support available to you 24/7? And then finally, have a disengagement strategy. How do we wind this thing down as this process is going forward? So when we think about crisis communications and we think about the crises that we're out, this will give you an idea. Now, those things that are in the blue columns, there are specific defined descriptors of what you do, and there's ways that you need to do internally and things that you have to do externally. Now, we always think about crises, how well did you do? We focus on the decision process, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the decision making, and the communication effectiveness. And you measure that across 4 dimensions, whether it's coming to you as a surprise and everything's a liability, are you at a level where you're really in a kind of a reaction message? Finally, are you up where you're thinking about this in advance in a supportive manner? Or finally, is it strategic and part of your culture? And you'll see a set of different descriptions. Normally, most organizations think that they are at a strategic level until they find themselves in the event and they're more in that stage 1 and stage 2. The time to find that out is now in your exercises, not later in the event. So next step, predict, plan, perform. What are the vulnerabilities and threats? What are the triggers? How do we monitor them? What are the impacts going to be? What are our plans? What's the training? What's the testing? What are the supplies? Who are the outside resources that we can bring back in? So within you should think about today and predict, how do I establish an intelligence network to give me that intel? Develop a crisis communications plan with message maps tailored to the risk and threat. Here's the question. Here's what we're going to say to employees. Here's the question. Here's what we're going to say to customers, et cetera, as that process comes. Conduct a communications audit. Have outside resource or internally look at where you are. And we're talking about who are the brand supporters, who are the brand detractors, how is the company perceived today, what's in place, what's our real capabilities. The DRJ Communications Workshop that we talked about is another opportunity. I did want to mention that there is a virtual exercise at 2 p.m. Eastern that you can put your crisis management team around the table and go through a communicable illness event, and it's going to be targeted at Zika. So if you would like to do that, that's Tuesday at 2 o'clock. You can register on the Firestorm website. And you can contact us about joining the Behaviors of Concern User Group. That's the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program of how you identify those behaviors before they escalate into violence. Now, there is a brief on today's webinar, and you'll be able to go to the Firestorm website and download that. And it'll give you some overviews of this and share it. We'll also have a recording of today that if you want others in your organization to listen or you'd like to go back through. I'd like to thank both the Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Association of Contingency, or now Continuity Planners, and Michael, also you in particular, for being on with us today. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
No, I just want to say I found this very interesting, and it's interesting, especially when you talked about who's going to be speaking and such. When I was in the military, I was public affairs officers, training the generals that they could not speak because some of them just weren't the right people, and who should be speaking. That was a big part, and being able to tell a general that they weren't the right person, and then going through and training the generals on how to speak and what they should do. Was an interesting process that I think a lot of people forget about. So thank you for bringing that up, because it's so important. Having the wrong speaker out there is probably the worst thing you could possibly do, and I really appreciate the effort you put in today, and thank you very much.
Oh, our pleasure, and I want to remind everyone again about the September event that's coming up with the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners. I think you'll find that of great value. And by the way,
Great.
Telling the general no is not always an easy thing or a pleasant one. So as you find yourself in this crisis, and we talk about crisis conversation, those are hard. So thank you again for being with us today. You can go to firestorm.com to register for future webinars, or send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or call us at 800-321-2219. Thank you for all that you do every day in your job and how you're helping your company and our country to be prepared to deal for these events. This is the type of thing that we have to handle one person at a time, and you play a very vital role. If you're in crisis and you need help, give us the call. Remember, stop that crisis, slow it down, get people to understand what they need to do. That's at the very heart. Thanks, everyone. Until next month, Jim Satterfield at Firestorm. Have a great day. Bye.